Okay, so I've keyframed a very basic walk cycle here, and I'll go over the poses, point out how the shoulders and hips move and rotate in a contrapposto manner to one another throughout the cycle. But again, and I can't stress this enough, the most important part of any animation exercise, particularly your first or one of your first animated performances, is to get up and act out that performance with your own body and ask the people around you, your family, your friends, to act out the movements and actions that you're trying to animate. That really is the most fundamental part of animating. If you were to walk into any animation studio in the world, you wouldn't see a bunch of animators sitting at their desks, working at their computers the entire time. You'd see them getting up, moving around, striking poses, asking their coworkers to strike poses and to perform movements, making ridiculous faces into the mirror. Animation is first and foremost about performance, and learning to act out the performances that you want to animate is the most important part of becoming an animator. For every animator, the first part of their career is spent largely animating the performances that they act out with their own bodies and faces, and that they observe their coworkers and friends and family acting out at their direction. It takes years to develop the skill to animate performances that go beyond what the animator can perform him or herself, and the ability and willingness to get up and kind of make a fool out of yourself is a crucial experience that you have to be willing to go through. So in the most basic walk cycle, the first pose is typically the heel contact for one of the feet. I typically start with the left, but that's really up to you. And in this pose, the front foot is making contact with the heel. The back foot has rotated up onto the ball of the foot. The body weight is in the process of moving forward and towards that lead leg. So in my case, towards the left. If we look at our hips and shoulders rectangles, you can see that in the front view, the hips are beginning to rotate down towards the front leg or the left leg. And because they're rotating down and towards that left leg, in the front view, the shoulders will rotate up on the same side. So the shoulders and the hips, and this is why I added these two rectangles, will always rotate in this contrapposto manner. So as one side goes down on the hips, that same side will go up on the shoulders. And this is true in the top view as well. So so you can see that the red hips rectangle is rotating towards that front leg, that left leg. So as a result, the shoulders rotate back and to the left. And you'll see as we go through these poses, the shoulders and the hips are constantly rotating in this contrapposto manner to each other. And that's because a walk cycle or a run cycle, but in this case a walk cycle, is largely about fighting against and giving in to gravity. So the body is always trying to maintain the center of balance. So as the lower body or the hips moves down and to the left, to counteract that movement, the shoulders must move up and to the left. And you'll see that when the right foot begins to move forward, the opposite action will occur with these two rectangles as the body moves. But during a walk cycle, you're constantly lifting up one leg and moving it forward from the back. And as you do that, you need to provide the room underneath your hips for that leg to pass forward. So the hips will rotate up on the side of that passing leg. And when the hips rotate up on one side, in order to maintain balance, they're going to move left or right towards the leg that remains on the ground. And every time that happens, the shoulders will rotate in this contrapposto manner in order to maintain that center of balance. So in the left heel contact pose, the hips will begin shifting towards the leg that's about to contact the ground, as the right leg will then lift up and move forward. So the hips are moving down and to the left. So the shoulders will rotate up and to the left, or down and to the right. The next pose is what we call the recoil or the down pose. And what's occurring from the heel contact pose to the down or recoil pose is that the body weight is coming down and to the left, because the left is the lead leg. That lead foot will flatten from the heel contact to flat on the ground. And this down or recoil pose represents the pose in which the hips are the lowest, closest to the ground, and rotated down the farthest towards the lead leg, so towards the left, in the front view, and in the top view. So in this pose, you can see that the hips have moved down and farthest to the left. And you can see that as a result, the shoulders rotate even more in that contrapposto manner, so even farther up and to the left, or down and to the right. So in this down or recoil pose, the hips are at their lowest point, their farthest point forward towards that front leg. They're rotated down as far as they're going to towards the left, and rotated forward to their farthest degree towards that left side. The next pose will be the passing pose. So in this pose, the left leg or the lead leg will begin to push the body weight up to provide the room for that right leg to move and kick forward in preparation for its heel contact pose. So you can see that the hips have moved up and back towards the middle. And as a result, the shoulders have straightened a bit. So they still represent the contrapposto angle in relation to the hips, but they have straightened out as well as the hips have straightened out. So you can see that the back leg or the right leg at this point has left the ground and is beginning to move forward. The next pose is called the high point. And in this pose, the lead leg, or the left leg in this case, will begin to push up onto the ball of the foot. And it's in the high point pose, hence the name, that the hips are going to be at their highest point. And that is to allow that back leg to kick forward in preparation for its heel contact pose. So you can see now that the left leg is completely straight, or nearly completely straight, and that the foot has rotated onto the ball of the foot. So this pose represents the highest position for the hips, and they have begun to start to move towards the right side of the body in preparation for the heel contact and then the down or recoil pose for the right side. This high point pose also represents the straightest that the hips and shoulders will be during the cycle. So you can see that they are relatively straight at this point, and the center of balance is about halfway between the left side and the right side. They're also fairly straight in the top view as well. The next pose will be the right heel contact. So the exact pose as our first pose on the opposite side. So from this high point pose, we're going into the right heel contact pose. So the body weight or the hips will move towards the right and will begin to rotate down and towards that right side and forward and towards that right side. So as a result, the shoulders will rotate up and to the right or down and to the left. And because the hips are rotating forward towards the right side, the shoulders will rotate back towards the right side. So again, creating and parenting these elongated cubes to the hips and the last spine joint where the arms extend is an optional step that you can undertake, but I think it's a good idea if this is your first time animating a walk cycle, because it makes it easier to judge the angle of the hips and shoulders in relation to one another. And that's sometimes difficult for beginning animators by just looking at the angle of the hips on the rig or the angle of the shoulders on the rig. So then we'll transition to the right down or recoil pose. So the body weight will move down and towards the right. So this will be the position in which the hips are at their lowest point again. So the hips move towards the foot that's flattening on the ground. This is also the pose where the hips will be rotated farthest down towards that right side and farthest forward towards that right side. So again, as a result, it's where the shoulders will rotate farthest up and to the right and back and to the right. And then we'll transition to the right passing pose, then to the right high point, and then the last pose in the cycle would be the left heel contact pose again. And for me, that would be at frame 70. But in order to create a perfect looping animation, I've set my timeline to be at frame 69. So the last frame of my animation will be one frame before the heel contact pose that begins the animation. So in order to make a perfect loop, you'll want to set your timeline to end one frame before the identical keyframe that begins the animation. So in my case, the second left heel contact pose is at frame 70, so I've set my time range to end at frame 69. So as you watch this, you can see all of these actions that we discussed happening in real time. So you can see that the left leg starts by contacting with the heel and then flattens on the ground. As that happens, the hips rotate down and towards that left leg and move down and towards that left leg. The shoulders will constantly rotate to mirror the rotation of the hips. And you can see that the hips cycle up and down through the cycle, and left and right through the cycle, and back and forward throughout the cycle. So during a walk cycle, the body is constantly fighting against and then giving in to gravity. It pushes up against it to allow the back leg to move and then kick forward, and then it gives into gravity again as that leg contacts the ground with the heel and then flattens in the down or recoil pose. The arms will rotate in the exact opposite manner as the legs. And this may seem obvious to you if you've thought about walking mechanics before, but if you haven't, it's something to observe. As your left leg is forward, your left arm will be back. As your right leg is back, your right arm will be forward. So you can see that the arms swing front to back in the opposite manner of the leg on that same side. So you can see here that as the left arm swings forward, the left wrist swings further in that direction as the left arm reaches its farthest point forward. And then as that same arm reaches its farthest point backwards, the left wrist rotates farther backwards at that point. So that swinging motion occurs at the apex of each of the arm swings, both forward and back. The other important thing to note is that different things are happening between these key poses. So between the heel contact and the recoil and down pose, all that's really happening is the foot is flattening from heel contact to flat on the ground. So the transition between heel contact and the down or recoil pose happens fairly quickly because all that's really happening is that the foot is flattening from heel contact to flat on the ground. And since the weight is moving down and towards that foot that's flattening on the ground, it happens even quicker. So you can see in my timeline, the distance between the keyframes is not equidistant. There's more time between the down or recoil pose and the passing pose, and between the passing and high point poses, and then between the high point and opposite heel contact poses. Between the heel contact and down and recoil pose, there are fewer frames between those two poses. You can select the keyframes on your timeline by holding down Shift and dragging over that area in the timeline. So right now I have the poses at frame 50, frame 40, and frame 35 selected. Clicking anywhere else in the timeline will get rid of that selection. I can drag left or right to move those keyframes. Moving the keyframes to the left will compress the amount of time between the keyframe that comes before it. So that will speed up the animation between those keyframes. Moving keyframes to the right will increase the amount of frames between two keyframes, which will slow down that action. If you set keyframes in both full body and body part mode, as I have for my arms, so typically I animate the arms only at their apex positions. The arms are at their farthest point forward and backwards at the heel contact poses. So in my left heel contact pose, my first keyframe, the right arm is at its farthest point forward, and the left arm is at its farthest point backwards. If I click my next keyframe button on my time controls, I'll go to my right heel contact pose, and that represents the farthest forward position for the left arm and the farthest backwards position for the right arm. And then the final keyframe for the arms is at frame 70, and that would be the exact same keyframe as the first frame. And I've keyframed the arms in body part modes so that the rest of the rig is keyframed at frame 0, frame 5, 15, 25, 35, 40, 50, 60, and then 70. But the arms are only keyed at frame 0, frame 35, and then frame 70. If I wanted to move the keyframes just for the arms, I would need to select any of the IK selectors in those body parts, go to body part mode, drag over the keyframes, and move them left or right. Because in full body mode, I'd be selecting the keyframes for the rest of the rig as well. You can also move keyframes left or right using something called the dope sheet. Try not to get offended by that name. It harkens back to the early days of traditional animation when keyframe artists were drawing the major poses and in-betweeners were drawing all of the frames in between those key poses. And in those days, everything had to be drawn by hand. So anything that you saw on the screen, whether it was a key, an extreme, a breakdown, or an in-between, all had to be drawn. But the keyframe artist would draw the major poses, and then the in-betweeners would draw the breakdowns and in-betweens. And the way that the keyframe artists would instruct the in-betweeners to draw those frames would be with something called the dope sheet. And you get to that from your Windows Animation Editor dope sheet. And it simply represents all of the keyframes for any selected objects. And again, if I wanted to select all of the selectors for my rig, I simply click in the blank space in the character controls window. I would simply double click in the blank space of the character controls window, and that will select all of the selectors for me. And you can see that the dope sheet simply represents each of those keyframes as these squares. They're black when they're unselected. They turn yellow when you select them. At the top is the summary. So if I wanted to move all of the keyframes from frame 35 forward, I would select the keyframes at the top in the dope sheet summary, and I would select all of the ones that are underneath there. And I use the same keyboard and mouse combinations to zoom and pan in my dope sheet. So the dope sheet is how you adjust the timing between your keyframes. You can affect motion with the dope sheet, or the timeline for that matter. The dope sheet or the timeline is how you edit the timing of your animations. And the way I suggest that you go about it is to set the initial keyframes for your walk cycle or the other animations that you create at equidistant intervals. So when I created this walk cycle, I created all my poses 10 frames apart. So the first keyframe at frame 0, the second keyframe at frame 10, frame 20, 30, 40, and so on. And then once I'm happy with the keyframe poses, then I will undertake a timing pass in which I'll go into my dope sheet or my timeline and move keyframes left or right to change their timing. So again, I made it so that there were fewer frames between the heel contact and down or recoil poses, and then more frames between the down and recoil pose and the passing pose, between the passing and high point, and then between the high point and opposite heel contact. After you're done with your timing pass, then you can take a crack at editing the motion. And to edit the motion, we access something called the graph editor. This is known as the curve editor in 3ds Max. And again, we get to that from the Windows Animation Editor's graph editor. And this is where we see the animation curves that are created when we set these keyframes. So just like the dope sheet, all of the selected nodes are listed on the left, and underneath them you can see that there's one entry for each keyframed attribute. So for my head, I have the translate X, translate Y, and translate Z, and then the rotate X, rotate Y, and rotate Z. Some of the animation curves on the HumanIK rig need to be set to independent Euler. So before I begin my motion pass with the graph editor, I typically select all of my selectors by double-clicking in the blank space in the character controls window, dragging over all of my animation curves, and going to Curves, Change Rotation Interpolation to Independent Euler. And that will make it so that you can adjust the tangencies for all of the parts of the rig. Now you're going to get an error message that it can't synchronize the rotation on all of the objects. That's fine, you can just ignore that. And obviously it's very difficult to work with these animation curves by selecting them all at the same time. So you'd want to go in and work with only one part of the body at a time. So I could start with just my left wrist and then work with one individual animation curve at a time. So if I wanted to work with just the translate X attribute of that left wrist effector, I would select the left wrist effector in my character controls window and then click on just the translate X. Each keyframe will have a tangency. So if I select the keyframe, you can see there's a tangent handle on each side of the keyframe. With my move tool, I can drag either one of those tangent handles to change the shape of the curve. I can also select the keyframe itself, hold down Shift and drag up or down to change its value, or left and right to change the frame on which it occurs. Again, I would suggest you do all of your timing with the dope sheet and timeline and focus just on the motion with the graph editor. So I wouldn't drag any keyframe to the left or right in your graph editor. I just wanted to let you know that you have that option. And then change the animation curves to affect the motion between the keyframes. So you can see that I haven't changed the initial keyframes here, but I am affecting the interpolation that the software creates between those keyframes by changing those tangent handles. And typically if you have blips or errors in your animation, if you see that the arms pass through the body at a particular frame or seem to pop at a particular frame, you can select that effector, go into your graph editor, and see where there's an unwanted peak or valley in your animation curves, and then fix those. And you can select the keyframes, click the spline button to achieve smooth interpolation between the keyframes. You can flatten the motion between keyframes. I wouldn't suggest you do that because that's going to create fairly robotic motion. You can flatten the tangents, which will increase the slow in and slow out, or ease in and ease out, moving into and out of each keyframe. But the most important part of this exercise, if this is your first time animating a 3D character rig, is by far the posing and the timing. As you get better at this, you'll start working more with the graph editor, more with the tangencies on each of the keyframes that you set. But if you use largely the IK controls for this rather than the FK, you shouldn't have too many unwanted peaks or valleys in your animation curves after you set the keyframes. One of the most important tools that an animator needs to develop is the ability to see awkward poses by just looking at the rig itself. So I'm going to turn off my model for a moment here, go back to my stance pose, kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. And I'm going to hide the two rectangles here for a moment. The HumanIK character rig, or any character rig that you use, doesn't have the anatomical limitations that your body does, or that the skeletal and muscle system of an animal has, that prohibits you or an animal from striking poses that would cause injury. If I were to move the arm here, and then pin it in the translation, and move the elbow, this would be an awkward pose for you to try to maintain on your own body. And again, you should be striking every single pose that you're trying to animate with your own body. And if you can, asking your spouse, boyfriend or girlfriend, friend, family member to strike those poses as well. Learning to identify poses that would be difficult or awkward to strike without having to attempt to strike that pose yourself will save you time. So learning to identify awkward poses with the limbs. I'm just going to pose the rig in some poses that would be difficult to maintain. If you try to put your arm into this position, you may be able to get there, but it's going to be very near to the end of your range of motion. Humans are very lazy by default, and we rarely reach the end of our range of motion in our normal daily activities. So you're rarely going to get your arms into these poses that represent the end of the range of your motion. The same thing for the legs. You might be able to get your right leg into this position, but again, it's going to be at the very end of your range of motion, and it's not going to be terribly comfortable. It's much more comfortable for you to move your knee outward than inward. It's difficult to rotate your ankle inward too far. You might be able to do that. I know I would not be able to strike this pose. You might be able to if you're particularly flexible. But again, it would be at the very end of your range of motion, and it would be awkward and uncomfortable for you to strike this pose. So learning to identify some of these awkward poses that you might be able to get into if you really tried, understanding that it's very rare for the human body to strike these extreme poses, particularly with the limbs, will help avoid the need to go through your poses first and find any of these awkward positions that would be difficult for you to reach with your own body. The other danger with computer animation is that the software by default interpolates the motion between keyframes in a smooth, constant manner, and humans do not move in that manner. So the default interpolation between these poses will not reflect the natural motion that occurs as you move your body. Typically humans move in fits and starts. And you can see this as you go throughout your day and reach for a pen. If you had a cup of coffee sitting in front of you and you wanted to take a drink of that, you wouldn't start that motion and move slowly and constantly towards that coffee cup at a slow, constant rate of speed. Once you decided, hey, I want a cup of coffee, you'd move your arm quickly out to the cup of coffee, you'd bring it back, you'd take a drink rather quickly, you'd place the coffee cup back onto the table quickly, and then get back into whatever you were doing at a fairly quick rate. So we typically move in fits and starts. And understanding that human movement is usually in fits and starts rather than at slow linear speeds will help you avoid maintaining the default interpolation that the software is going to create for you. So if we watch our walk cycle again, a walk cycle is actually one of the few examples where you'll see this sort of constant motion, because during the walk cycle you're constantly fighting and giving into gravity. You really can't stop at any point during the walk cycle when you're in a pose in which you're fighting against or giving into gravity. If your body weight is moving forward and to the left, if you try to pause as your hips are shifting down and towards the left, it's going to be difficult for you to do that because gravity is going to bring your body weight down and to the left. And one of the reasons that animators typically begin with a walk cycle is because it is an opportunity to animate a constant state of motion for a set period of time. So it's important to create preview animations as you work, and in Maya those are called play blasts. So rather than relying strictly on the playback that you see when you hit play in your timeline in Maya, you want to create play blasts periodically as you work. And I typically turn off the X-ray joints for this, and then hide the FK and IK on my control rig so that I can see the movement of the body a bit more clearly in these play blasts. And I typically create one that's near the front view. So I'll line up my camera so that it's looking at the character fairly head on. And you can create a play blast by going to your Windows Play Blast option box, or by right-clicking on the timeline and going to the same Play Blast option box. And this is simply going to create a video that is screen captures of every frame of animation. So you can leave the default settings, which are typically an AVI on your PC. It'll be a QuickTime on the Mac, around 70% of your quality. It'll be about half the size of your window. You can also set this to be from your render settings. So if you've set up render settings to be 640 by 480 and the scale at 0.5, that would be 320 by 240. You can save the file to a specific location when you want to create a play blast that you want to upload to the classroom. But typically when you're creating play blasts just to get a look at your motion as you're working, you want to leave save to file checked off and remove temporary files checked on so that your computer will delete the play blasts when you finish them so that they don't take up too much space on your computer. You can see that my animation is fairly slow to start, so I would want to adjust the timing of my animation so that it's a bit quicker. But I typically create a play blast from the front view to get a look at it, one from the side view. And once you know that your play blast options are set to give you a decent view of your animation, you don't have to go to the option box every time. You can just right click and choose play blast. And then I'll typically create one of the 3/4 view as well. So I could see that my animation is a bit slow. So I'll select all of my effectors here, go into my dope sheet, and I'm going to speed this up a little bit. So I'll select all the keyframes except for the first one in my dope sheet summary, move them to the left, use Control to deselect the one I don't want. And again, moving the keyframes to the left, I'm reducing the amount of frames between them. And the keyframes you see here on the timeline where the character has stopped moving represent the keyframes for the fingers. I haven't animated my fingers, and I would suggest you skip that for the walk cycle as well. And I would suggest you skip that for your walk cycle as well. I typically set the hands into a relaxed pose and leave them in that pose for the entire walk cycle. So I'm not going to worry about moving those keyframes. So I can kind of see that my animation now stops at frame 40. So I'd want to set my range to be 39 to be able to see the loop. And then I'll turn off my display. And let's get a look at this from the side. Create another play blast and see how this looks. Right, so better. Timing is better here. This isn't a perfect walk cycle. It's fairly plain. For your first walk cycle, I would suggest you stick with a fairly mundane walk. If you have animated a walk cycle before, whether with HumanIK or the cat rig in 3ds Max or some other character rig, you might want to consider trying to animate a walk with more personality or a walk that better fits the character design. You'll see that on the Turbo Squid page that I provided you, there's a Popeye character. Some of you may be too young to know what Popeye was. He was well before my time, but maybe some of you have heard of Popeye and know a bit about the character. He ate spinach, made him very strong. Typically, Popeye cartoons involved his girlfriend Olive Oyl being terrorized by the villain Brutus in some way, and then Popeye would save Olive Oyl by inhaling a can of spinach that made him very strong, and then he would beat up Brutus in new and inventive ways each time. So his walk was a very manly, strong walk with clenched fists, where his oversized forearms were prominently displayed. An animator named Preston Blair helped codify the very early walk cycles and run cycles in traditional animation in those early days. You can still find the diagrams of the Preston Blair walk cycles, both for two-legged and four-legged figures, in simple Google searches. Your instructor will share this in the classroom with you. So if this is your first time animating a walk cycle, I would stick with something like a standard walk, maybe the double bounce walk, maybe the strut. The shuffle is actually a fairly simple walk cycle. The body stays a little bit lower. The upper body is hunched forward and the head is hanging for the entire walk cycle. The arms really don't move too much, as if they're in the pockets the whole time. And hopefully you can see the attitude that each of these walk cycles is meant to portray. The standard walk is fairly benign. It's not meant to portray happiness or sadness, anger or surprise. The double bounce is typically meant to portray confidence, happiness, something of that nature. Same thing with the strut. Confidence, maybe extreme confidence. The shuffle, obviously sadness, depression. I wouldn't suggest you try something like the sneak or the tiptoe or even the skip for your first walk cycle. But if you get through the first one, you found that you got a pretty good result and you want to try one of these more advanced cycles, feel free. But the Preston Blair diagrams are really great, simple diagrams for what's happening in each of these key poses in these cycles. And he also gives you an indication of the cycling of the height of the character in each of these cycles. And this basic cycle would hold for the hips as well. They would go up and down throughout the cycle. Same thing for the left to right. The hips will move left to right. Throughout the walk cycle, the hips will move left to right, up and down. Shoulders will move right to left. But what you see here is not a perfect walk cycle. If I'd spent more time on it, I could have given it more attitude, more detail, better timing. But this is about the product that you're looking for in this very first walk cycle animation assignment. The arms don't pass through the body. There's no awkward poses of the knees or the elbows. There are no blips or hitches in the motion. The feet don't appear to slide on the ground when they should be supporting the body weight. I would suggest you create what we call an in-place walk cycle rather than a traveling walk cycle, because a traveling walk cycle isn't loopable. If you're animating the character to traverse distance as it walks, obviously at the end of the cycle the character is going to be in a different position than at the start of the cycle, so that won't be a perfect looping animation, and that is a requirement for the walk cycle assignment. So this is about what you're shooting for this very first walk cycle assignment.